June 6, 1944, 06:30 hours. Omaha Beach, Normandy. The first rays of dawn pierced through the smoke and salt spray, illuminating a beach transformed into an abattoir. Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich crouched in a reinforced bunker overlooking the carnage, his fingers wrapped around the trigger mechanism of an MG-42 machine gun that had been firing in controlled bursts since the first landing craft appeared on the horizon. Around him, the concrete walls vibrated with incoming naval artillery, each shell a hammer blow from warships he could not see but could hear with terrifying clarity. The Americans were dying in terrible numbers on the sand below, cut down as they struggled through obstacles and wire, just as Wehrmacht doctrine had predicted. But something was wrong. The dead kept being replaced. New waves arrived, and then Dietrich heard a sound that made no tactical sense. A crackling, distorted voice speaking English, not from a command post, but from the beach itself, from a soldier lying in the surf. The voice was calling coordinates, calling fire missions, calling in naval artillery with the precision of a forward observer in a protected position, except this observer was pinned down, exposed, yet somehow transmitting. Dietrich had been briefed that American communications would collapse under fire, that their vaunted technology would fail in combat conditions, that their elaborate radios would prove too delicate for battlefield use. The voice kept transmitting. The naval shells kept falling, adjusting, walking up the beach toward his position with methodical accuracy. And in that moment, as another salvo obliterated the bunker 300 meters to his left, Dietrich understood that the Americans had brought something to Normandy that was more dangerous than their numbers or their armor. They had brought a web of instant communication that turned every soldier into a node, every squad into a switchboard, every company into a real-time coordination mechanism that made the Wehrmacht's rigid command structure look like the relic of an earlier age. For 2 years, German military leadership had dismissed American communication technology as symptomatic of their broader weakness, a reliance on machines to do what properly trained soldiers should accomplish through discipline and doctrine. Hitler himself had mocked reports of American advances in portable radio equipment, declaring that the Wehrmacht's proven system of runners, telephone lines, and centralized command would triumph over gadgets carried by troops he considered soft and poorly trained. German doctrine emphasized the primacy of the officer corps, the importance of face-to-face command, the necessity of maintaining hierarchical control. Radios existed, certainly, but they were bulky, vehicle-mounted affairs used at battalion level and above, not something entrusted to common soldiers who might misuse them or break under pressure. The American approach seemed wasteful, even absurd. Why equip squads and platoons with expensive radio sets when battlefield conditions would destroy them and undertrained conscripts would mishandle them? The answer was landing on Normandy's beaches in wave after wave, carried in waterproof cases and strapped to the backs of men who understood that in modern warfare, information moved faster than bullets, and coordination mattered more than courage. The weapon Hitler had laughed at was the SCR-300 radio, nicknamed the walkie-talkie, though that term barely captured its revolutionary impact. Weighing 38 pounds with batteries, it could transmit voice communications up to 5 miles under ideal conditions. Less in combat, but still sufficient to link company commanders with platoon leaders in real time. More importantly, it represented a philosophical shift in how armies could function. The Wehrmacht operated on a model inherited from the Prussian General Staff. Centralized planning, detailed orders issued before battle, strict adherence to the chain of command. Once combat began, junior officers were expected to execute orders, not improvise based on changing conditions. Communication flowed up the hierarchy slowly, decisions came down slowly, and adaptation was measured in hours. The Americans had built a different system entirely, one that treated information as ammunition and every radio operator as a potential decision point. Squad leaders could call for artillery support directly. Platoon commanders could adjust tactics based on real-time intelligence. Company captains could coordinate with adjacent units without routing requests through battalion headquarters. The SCR-300 did not just transmit voices. It transmitted initiative down the ranks, distributing decision-making authority in a way that made American units flexible, responsive, and maddeningly difficult to predict. Dietrich's bunker survived the first naval barrage, but his communication with regimental headquarters did not. The telephone line had been severed, and the runner sent to restore contact never returned. He was isolated, making decisions based on what he could see through his firing slit. A 200-meter arc of beach where Americans continued to advance, fall, and be replaced by others who seemed to materialize from the smoke and chaos. He did not know that the strong point 3 kilometers to his east had been overrun. He did not know that American Rangers were scaling the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc. He did not know that the carefully coordinated defensive plan was fragmenting into isolated pockets, fighting without coordination because the Wehrmacht's communication infrastructure was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that did not need wires or runners to maintain cohesion. The Americans knew where he was. They had triangulated his machine gun fire. A forward observer with an SCR-300 was directing a destroyer's 5-inch guns with the calm precision of an artillery officer in a protected command post. The irony was suffocating. Dietrich had been trained to believe that superior German discipline would triumph over American disorganization. But the Americans were not disorganized. They were networked, and the network was immune to the kind of decapitation strikes that crippled Wehrmacht units when their command posts were destroyed. The SCR-300 had entered service in 1942, developed by Motorola in a crash program that prioritized battlefield durability and operational simplicity over technical elegance. It used frequency modulation to reduce static, ran on readily available batteries, and could be operated by soldiers with minimal training. The U.S. Army had ordered them in quantities that German intelligence found incomprehensible. Over 50,000 units by D-Day, with production ramping up to equip not just every company, but eventually every platoon in combat divisions. The cost per unit was significant, roughly $230 in 1944 dollars. But the Americans manufactured them anyway, applying the same industrial abundance that produced Shermans by the tens of thousands, and Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them. The SCR-300 was not technically superior to German radio technology in terms of range or clarity. It was superior in deployment philosophy. The Germans had better radios in their command vehicles. The Americans had adequate radios in the hands of every unit that needed to coordinate fire, maneuver, or call for support. Quality had been sacrificed for quantity, and in warfare, quantity of communication created a quality all its own: situational awareness. By late afternoon on June 6th, as Dietrich's ammunition ran low and the Americans established positions beyond his killing zone, he finally received orders via a breathless runner who had survived the dash from battalion headquarters. The orders were 6 hours old, based on a tactical situation that no longer existed, directing him to hold a defensive line that had already collapsed on both flanks. The Americans facing him were in constant radio contact with their command structure, receiving updated intelligence, calling in airstrikes on targets of opportunity, coordinating movements with adjacent units. Dietrich was operating on information that had aged into irrelevance during its journey through the fractured Wehrmacht communication system. The gap was not merely technological but temporal. The Americans were fighting in the present while he was executing plans conceived in the past. When he finally received permission to withdraw after nightfall, it came too late. The route had been cut by American units that had infiltrated the gaps in the German line, identified the weak points through radio reconnaissance, and exploited them with the speed that only real-time coordination could provide. The symbol of the SCR-300 recurred throughout the Normandy campaign and beyond, becoming a persistent source of frustration for Wehrmacht commanders who found their tactical doctrines obsolete against an enemy that could adapt faster than German units could report changing conditions. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, inspecting defensive positions weeks before D-Day, had dismissed concerns about American radio equipment, insisting that proper fortifications and determined soldiers would neutralize any technological advantage. After the invasion, his assessment changed dramatically. In a report to Berlin dated June 12, 1944, Rommel wrote, "The enemy's ability to coordinate artillery, naval gunfire, and air support in real time has proven decisive. Our communication networks are too vulnerable, too centralized. We are fighting blind while they see everything." The admission was startling, coming from a commander who had built his reputation on mobile warfare and tactical flexibility. But Rommel recognized what many of his peers refused to acknowledge: that the Americans had fundamentally reimagined battlefield communication, distributing it down to levels where German doctrine considered it unnecessary. The transformation was not immediate, but cumulative, a gradual realization that spread through the Wehrmacht as unit after unit encountered the same phenomenon. American forces that should have been disorganized after taking casualties instead maintained coherence, called in precise fire support, and coordinated complex maneuvers without the elaborate staff work that German operations required. In the bocage fighting that followed D-Day, where visibility was measured in meters and battles fragmented into dozens of small unit actions, the SCR-300 became decisive. A German platoon ambushing an American patrol would achieve initial surprise, inflict casualties, and then face coordinated counterattacks from multiple directions within minutes because the surviving Americans had radioed for support, received it, and directed it onto German positions while those positions were still being established. The Wehrmacht's training emphasized achieving local superiority through concentration of force and exploitation through rapid maneuver. But concentration required time to organize, and maneuver required communication that the Americans could disrupt while maintaining their own. The radio had inverted the tactical equation. Lieutenant Hans Weber, a company commander in the 352nd Infantry Division that defended Omaha Beach, survived the invasion and kept a diary that was later recovered by American forces. His entry for June 8, 1944, captured the psychological impact. "We kill them, and they keep coming. We cut their telephone wires, and they keep talking. It is as if they have 1,000 invisible messengers carrying orders at the speed of light. Our runners are shot. Our wires are broken. Our radios are too few and too precious to risk in forward positions. Theirs are everywhere, carried by common soldiers who speak to their artillery as casually as one speaks to a comrade. This is not the American army we were told to expect. This is something new, and we have no doctrine to counter it." Weber's observation went beyond tactical frustration to touch on something more fundamental. The SCR-300 represented a democratization of information that was antithetical to German military culture. The Wehrmacht trusted authority downward reluctantly, believing that junior officers and enlisted men required close supervision. The American system trusted them with radios, with the ability to call in devastating firepower, with the responsibility to make real-time decisions that could affect battalion-level operations. The radio became more than a tool. It became an embodiment of American military philosophy, where German doctrine emphasized rigid adherence to plans developed by staff officers removed from the front. American doctrine emphasized adaptability by commanders who could see the battlefield and respond to its realities. The SCR-300 was the enabling technology for this philosophy, the physical manifestation of a command culture that valued initiative over obedience, flexibility over predictability. It was no accident that the same nation that mass-produced radios for frontline use also trained officers to trust subordinates with mission-type orders, empowering them to achieve objectives through whatever methods the situation demanded. The radio and the culture reinforced each other, creating a feedback loop where better communication enabled more distributed decision-making, which in turn justified more investment in communication technology. By the time the Allied armies broke out of Normandy in late July, the Wehrmacht's communication disadvantage had compounded into a strategic crisis. American armored columns equipped with vehicle-mounted radios could coordinate movements across dozens of kilometers, concentrating forces at breakthrough points faster than German reserves could respond. Tactical air support, vectored by forward observers with SCR-300s, turned German daylight movements into suicide missions. The vaunted German prowess in mobile warfare, honed in Poland and France and the early years in Russia, had been neutralized by an enemy that moved information faster than the Wehrmacht moved tanks. Hitler's mockery of American radio technology had aged into one more instance of fatal underestimation. Joining his dismissals of American industrial capacity, American will to fight, and American ability to coordinate complex operations across global distances, Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich survived Normandy, retreated through France, and was captured during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. In a POW camp in Belgium, he encountered American guards who carried handheld radios, SCR-536, handy-talkies, smaller cousins of the SCR-300, and used them to coordinate prisoner movements, meal distributions, and administrative tasks that would have required a German Feldwebel and 2 runners to accomplish. The casual ubiquity of the technology struck him more forcefully than the defeat itself. America had not merely built better radios. It had built enough radios to treat them as disposable, to issue them for mundane purposes, to integrate communication so deeply into military culture that even guard duty involved real-time coordination. In post-war interviews, Dietrich was asked what surprised him most about fighting the Americans. His answer was immediate. Their voices. Everywhere, their voices. Calling fire. Coordinating movements. Speaking to each other as if distance meant nothing. We fought with discipline and courage. They fought with radios. And in the end, the radios were more powerful than discipline. The SCR-300 did not win the war alone, but it represented a broader truth about how wars are won. That systems matter more than weapons. That coordination multiplies force. That information dominates battlefields as surely as firepower. The radio that Hitler laughed at had outsmarted his army not through superior engineering, but through superior deployment philosophy. It had enabled a democratic military culture that distributed authority, trusted subordinates, and adapted faster than hierarchical structures could respond. The crackling voices that Dietrich heard on Omaha Beach were not just calling fire missions. They were announcing a new kind of warfare, one where every soldier with a radio became a potential command node, where centralized control gave way to networked coordination, where the side that shared information most effectively would prevail over the side that hoarded it most carefully. On the beaches of Normandy, In the hedgerows of Normandy, through the forests of the Ardennes and across the Rhine into Germany itself, the SCR-300 transmitted not just voices, but a message that the Wehrmacht learned too late to counter. That abundance applied to information was as decisive as abundance applied to production. That connecting soldiers was as important as arming them, and that in modern war, the army that could think collectively would always defeat the army that thought hierarchically. The weapon Hitler had dismissed with contempt had proven more revolutionary than any tank or plane, because it changed not just how battles were fought, but how armies could organize, decide, and act. In the crackle of radio static and the calm voices calling coordinates through smoke and chaos, the future of warfare announced itself, and the Wehrmacht, bound by doctrine and doctrine by hierarchy, never stood a chance.